ahead and have our presenters introduce themselves. John, since you are not on mute, would you like to start?
Sure. My name is John Meyer. I'm the Vice President of Development for Midas Gold. And so I manage the technical aspects associated with the project and oversee this AOC, the technical aspects of the AOC. And that's what my piece will focus on today is the physical stuff that we're planning to do on the ground. So thanks, Shelley.
And I'm Corinne Snow. I'm one of the outside counsel for Midas Gold, and I got to help out with putting together this ASAOC and the projects involved with it. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the background of the site and the ASAOC we put together.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Again, if you guys do have questions, please feel free to pop them into the Q&A box that you will find at the bottom of your screen, and we will make sure to get as many of those answered as we possibly can. But for now, Corinne, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Shelley. John, would you go to the next slide, please? So as many of you know, historical mining operations have led to some environmental problems at different sites. And what's unique about the Stibnite Gold project and why I was really excited to get involved with this is the idea and vision here is that modern mining techniques can actually be used as part of the solution to those legacy problems. So the idea here was, Midas through mining could help clean up legacy problems that had been caused by mining. Next slide. So this is just a brief overview of the history of the Stibnite mining district. As you can see, there has been mining in this area for more than 100 years. And a lot of this mining happened before the modern environmental laws existed, before people even knew about, what some of the problems could be from mining and leaving behind some of the wastes from mining. Next slide. So now that we know about all that, EPA worked with, from 2002 until 2012, some of the historical operators of this site, before Midas had ever come on the scene, to try and do some cleanup on the site. And that was a partial solution, but as you'll see on the next slide, there's still issues at the site. Next slide, please. So from this, you can kind of see, and just to orient everyone, water on the site flows from the south to the north, which always throws me off. Yeah, so John's showing you. So as the water comes through, you can see how it turns into the lighter purple as it's going past those yellow areas, which are areas of historic legacy mining areas where there's still waste there. I'll also note that the background levels of antimony and arsenic are just high in this area in general. So we have a lot of it in the background that's getting into the water as well. Next slide, please. So Midas Gold came on the scene after a lot of these problems had already been caused and wanted to help. So what does that look like? First, the biggest solution here is going to be the actual mining, where a lot of these legacy materials are going to be removed through the mining process itself. And when they're no longer there, there will no longer be groundwater flowing through them and water quality will improve. Next slide. So here you can kind of see where the legacy areas are, and the plan of restoration operations is where Midas is going to be operating. So you can see all the green areas, which are legacy areas that will be addressed through the mining operations themselves. But as you can see, there's still some smaller red areas where we know that there are legacy issues, but that weren't going to be part of any of the mining operations or addressed through the mining. Next slide, please. So what to do about those red areas? This is where CERCLA comes in. It's a federal environmental law. And the idea here is that we could do a comprehensive cleanup through CERCLA for some of those areas that weren't otherwise going to be impacted. Next slide. And CERCLA has what are called time critical and non-time critical removal actions. And as the name suggests, that means that you can work with the government to determine what are the most time-critical issues that need to be solved and work on solving those quickly, or certainly more quickly than the non-time critical ones. This kind of solution requires a lot of resources. I can tell you from having worked with John and others on just putting together this ASAOC, it takes a lot of time, energy, thought on where you're going to do these projects, how you're going to do them. We have to work with our government partners because we need approvals from EPA and here from the US Forest Service, because some of this is on Forest Service land, in order to actually craft these solutions and be able to be allowed to go out and do them. So one of the biggest risks that Midas Gold would face if not entering into this kind of CERCLA agreement is being held responsible for the mining wastes that others created. So the way federal environmental laws are set up, you can be held just as responsible as the people who actually caused them, even if you come along later and you're just an owner or you go out to try and clean them up on your own. This has been a big problem for cleaning up historic mining sites, as you can see from this Government Accountability Office report. And so this is one of the big issues that Midas Gold was trying to confront and address through the CERCLA ASAOC process. Okay, so what is our ASAOC? We spent several years working with the federal government, with both the EPA and the Forest Service, and eventually got concurrence with the US Department of Justice as well. We were lucky to have a lot of hard work, both from people at Midas but also from the government, working on crafting a very complicated solution to this problem. And we finally got the ASAOC finalized on January 15th, 2021. So now we have it. Now, as I mentioned, we put this together with our partners in the federal government, but there was also involvement from the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality, and EPA did consultations with 2 Idaho tribes, the Chauvin and the Nez Perce, throughout the process as well. As I mentioned, CERCLA has both time critical and non-time critical removal actions involved. And for this particular site, the solution that was developed has both. So there's a phased approach where Midas Gold has already committed to do the first phase of work, but the agreement, and that's a time critical phase, but the agreement is set up so that Forest Service, EPA, and Midas Gold can agree after phase 1 to enter into subsequent phases and do subsequent work over different periods of time that would work well with the mining as it's going on. And those later phases, phase 2 and phase 3, would be non-time critical. Next slide, please. So what this AOC basically does, first, it requires Midas Gold to take certain actions in this first phase that it's committed to do. And those have to be done in the next 4 years. And those have to be done before Midas Gold permits to mine, and regardless of whether or not it ever gets any permits to mine. So it guarantees that there's going to be action to improve water quality on the site starting now, and that work will get done. The second is a comprehensive cleanup. So the ASAOC addresses legacy issues and does so in ways that would not have happened just by any mining that happened. So it means that the site is going to get broader and more cleanup than it would have just under Midas's mining plans. The third is on liability. As I said before, one of the biggest detractors from doing this kind of work for companies like Midas is that they could inherit a lot of liability for problems that they didn't cause. And in fact, they were never even around when they were caused. And I want to be clear that this agreement does not free Midas Gold up from any liability for future mining, other things that it might do on the site. It only gives it protection for doing the work that it has agreed to do under this agreement for this specific cleanup. The fourth is This is legally binding. So while Midas Gold chose to enter into this agreement with the EPA and the Forest Service, now that it's agreed to do so, it has to undertake the phase 1 work, and it has to do so on the schedule that's been set. They're going to be doing this work with ongoing oversight and monitoring from the EPA and the Forest Service. And Midas Gold has put up financial assurances, meaning that no matter what happens to the company, the money has already been set aside to do this phase 1 work. And the federal government can undertake that work even if something happens to Midas Gold. And finally, nothing in this ASAOC permits mining. Midas Gold still has to go through all the rigorous federal permitting processes that it otherwise would. This doesn't give it a free pass from any of that. Next slide, please. All right, so now I'm going to turn it over to John Meyer, who's going to walk you through the technical details of all the work that Midas is going to do on the site.
Can everybody hear me okay? Yep. Okay. So first I'll talk to phase 1. There's really several main components to phase 1. The first of which is the 3 water diversions that we're proposing to undertake. And I'll talk to those in subsequent slides, but really the diversions, the intent of the diversions is trying to basically inhibit water that is upslope and upstream of mining impacted areas and divert the water around those mining impacted areas to try to keep clean water clean. The second piece of the phase 1 work is removal of approximately 325,000 tons of historical mine waste that are currently in problematic locations, adjacent to and within the East Fork and then Meadow Creek. So that 325,000 is in 3 specific areas, and I've got some slides that illustrate those areas and where that material comes from. Associated with those 2 removal actions, the diversions and the removals of the historic mining waste, we'll be completing biological assessments in those areas. We'll also be responsible for completing 404 Clean Water Act valuations, as well as assessing the potential for there to be cultural resources in those areas. So the other couple of pieces that are involved in phase 1 are we're going to be completing a historical mine waste characterization study of the site. And we've done a lot of characterization of the site as part of NEPA, but this characterization really focuses on where the historical mining waste is. And that really work informs what subsequent cleanups will be in phases 2 and 3. In addition, we'll be completing some added investigations on 5 specific historical adits at the site. And again, those investigations are meant to inform potential actions that we would undertake in phases 2 and 3. And all of this work, as Corinne mentioned, is backstopped by financial assurance, and that assurance is in place, and it's approximately it's $7.5 million. All right. So this is the first of the 3 water diversion projects that are included in the phase 1 work. The slide on the left is an aerial shot of what we refer to as the Northwest Bradley dumps. This shot is looking almost due south, and it's near the confluence of Sugar Creek and the East Fork. And what you see here, the East Fork, if you can see my cursor, is here. It flows down the page so that the bottom of the page is north, and that's the direction of flow. If you're familiar with the Bradley pit, that's basically in the upper left portion of the screen. And so the water flows through the Bradley pit and down East Fork. This dump is on the west side of that. And it's approximately 4.5 million tons, primarily composed of sulfide altered waste rock and overburden. And historically, there was a creek called the Hennessy Creek, and it flowed down, and in all likelihood originally reported down near where the Alpine pit is today. However, as part of mining, Bradley diverted that and flowed towards the north and around the dump. The challenge with that diversion is that once we get to the north portion of the dump, 100% of that water that's in the ditch, and this is both in low flow times and in peak flow times, infiltrates through the bottom of that ditch, and down gradient, of course, is the mining waste, and so it is flowing through part of that mining waste. So we do, much of the flow does reemerge down at the toe here again, but we know that there's an appreciable amount of seepage through the bottom of that ditch that reports in through the dump. So what we're planning to do as part of the phase 1 work is to try to take the most direct route possible from where the diversion starts at the downstream end of the Hennessy Creek and get it into the pit lake as quickly as possible and as directly as possible. And we'll be doing that. That design work has been initiated, and we'll be working with EPA and Forest Service personnel on establishing exactly the best route to take that water. So that work is ongoing. We hope to begin some of that work in the upcoming construction season, but we've got a bunch of work to do before we get there. But obviously, the plan here is by diverting the water and taking the most direct route into the lake and into the East Fork, we hope to reduce the amount of metal, primarily arsenic and antimony, that is being picked up along this reach. Because if you look from the upstream end of the lake all the way to Sugar Creek, this reach accounts for up to half the arsenic that is in the East Fork along at this point. So that amount varies as a function of the seasons, but this is obviously a major contributor, and we're hoping to reduce that load as a result of this diversion. The next diversion project is quite similar in that what we're trying to do here, and this is referred to as the DMEA adit and waste rock dump area. DMEA flows down. This is facing west. The photo is facing west, and so this whole slope here that you see is facing east, and this is what represents what we call DMEA, Defense Minerals Exploration Act creek. That creek currently flows into a waste rock dump that was developed as a result of driving this adit. This dump is in the bottom of that catchment, and the creek essentially flows into and through that dump, and then it pokes out both at the toe and manifests itself in terms of seeps in the dump itself. And we're picking up metal, both arsenic, antimony, and other elements as well in through that mechanism. So this is somewhat similar to the previous divert. What we're trying to do is prevent the water from running through that dump, and we'll be developing either an open channel or a culvert type of design that moves around the outside toe of this dump to again try to keep clean water clean. The last of the 3 diversions that we're proposing for phase 1 is in an area that's really in the old Bradley Mill and Smelter area. Meadow Creek basically flows down at the bottom of this photo, and in through this area, it's flowing from left to right. And the unimpacted or non-mining impacted catchment that's up gradient of this area currently flows down this slope. And then ultimately most of that flow reports in through groundwater. And you can see in this little cross section on the right that that groundwater likely percolates through historical mining waste where the old smelter and mill buildings were. It's also worth noting that one of the very first tailings facilities that was at the site is near that section line that's drawn, the AA prime. And so we're also concerned about whether that flow flows through the old tailings as well. And so what we're proposing to do, in fact, is to reestablish the diversion that was in place some time ago, and divert that water from this upstream catchment towards the west and into what's referred to as this marsh area, this Keyway marsh area. And again, trying to reduce groundwater infiltration and surface water flow over top of this historical mining waste area. So those are the three diversions. I'm happy to answer any questions. It's probably most convenient at the end of the presentation. But what I was going to go through in this slide is the second item that I mentioned, the second component of the phase 1 work, which is really removal of 325,000 tons of mine waste. And I just wanted to touch on where that's coming from and where it's going. So there's really three areas. This photo on the top illustrates, again, this is that Northwest Bradley dump area where we're planning the diversion. But this removal action involves moving about 100,000 tons of material that's directly adjacent to the East Fork. This dump toes right into the East Fork. And so this removal action is designed to get material out of that riparian area adjacent to the river and to move it, get it into more of a high and dry location up on top of the dump. So the goal here is to not increase the footprint of the existing mine waste, was really to shrink the footprint and to try to get that waste away from the banks of the river. So it does two things for us. That's in all likelihood where the groundwater is reporting into the river in through that zone. And it's also an area where water that is flowing down the East Fork is interacting with that waste. So that's the first 100,000 of the 325,000. The next is an area that we refer to as the Bradley Man Camp area. The name is as you'd expect. It's where there were camps historically for mine workers in through the 40s and 50s associated with Bradley's mine. And that ultimately there's just not a lot of flat real estate out at Stibnite, and this area was made flat to facilitate that infrastructure. And the easiest way to make that area flat is to use mine waste. And so there's a long reach adjacent to the East Fork that has that mining waste adjacent to it. It is associated with higher levels of antimony and arsenic through this reach. And so what we're planning to do here is to pick up that 200,000 tons that includes the Man Camp dumps, or the Bradley Man Camp dumps, and move that to what's referred to as the on-off pads in the Meadow Creek area. Those on-off pads are historical heap leach pads that were used in the 80s and 90s to leach oxide gold ores from the West End area. Those are asphalt-lined leach pads that are outside of the floodplain, the high water area along the Meadow Creek area. And it's ideally suited to get the material out of the riparian area and to move it into and cover that area. So that again is a fairly simple from the perspective of logistics. We have pretty good infrastructure close to that area in terms of roads. Our impacts we expect to be pretty modest, and by picking that material up and getting it outside of the floodplain and really the groundwater table, we expect to have a significant impact locally on the amount of arsenic and antimony that's reporting in as a result of groundwater percolating through that and meteoric water that hits it. The last removal action is really at the confluence of Meadow Creek and the East Fork. This is an area, there's the photo down to the lower right. You can see the road here. This is what we refer to at site as a box culvert. The road crosses over the East Fork from west to east here, and this road continues on up to the Thunder Mountain Road, if you're familiar with that. This area is a former tailings facility that essentially the East Fork was dammed up, and tailings were ponded behind that dam as where the river flows. And as a result, there's a lot of tailings adjacent to the banks and in the East Fork and Meadow Creek as we move up Meadow Creek in through this area. And this removal action really is focused on, the other two removal actions are really focused on run of mine waste. So much more granular materials, blasted rock from the open pit. And this material is really focused on milled tailings. And yes, it will be commingled and mixed with some amount of naturally fine-grained material, alluvial materials in the area. But our goal here is to move as much of the tailings adjacent to the river and within the river as possible and get it outside of that floodplain and avoid that interaction between material that has elevated arsenic and antimony in it, and try to avoid that interaction with surface and groundwater. So there's I mentioned in my opening slide that there's some studies that we're planning to undertake in phase 1 that are really driven at informing other removal actions associated with phases 2 and 3. And one of those studies is to conduct an adit study on 5 specific adits at the site, namely Bailey, DMEA, Bonanza, Cinnabar, and Meadow Creek. And ultimately, all of these adits have some amount of flow associated with them. Some of them very, very modest, to the tune of on the order of a gallon a minute, some much higher at say 60 gallons a minute, some of the higher flows. And all of those flows contribute to increased load into the river system. And this adit study is really about, firstly, characterizing exactly the mechanism that's going on, the physical aspects of the tunnels, and also the geochemical things that are happening, so that we can then arrive at appropriate designs and removal actions associated with those 5 adits. So I don't think Corinne really touched on the bridge phase. And the bridge phase is really meant, it's what it says, it's meant to bridge us between phase 1 and phase 2 and 3 if necessary. So ultimately, if the permitting time frame for our project extends longer than we expect, we would optionally enter into a bridge phase agreement with EPA and the Forest Service to conduct additional removal actions during that window in time. And the bridge phase is really, you know, we basically have, if digested the ASAOC document, in the statement of work associated with it, there are a number of areas that include historical mining waste. And what this bridge phase evaluation would do would determine, well, we've done the diversions, we've moved this 325,000 tons. What's the next piece? What's the next best area to attack and conduct additional removal actions or cleanups? And those could involve removal action, they could involve water diversions, could involve caps and covers. But this bridge phase, we would be conducting a study within phase one to establish what the appropriate actions are to do in that optional bridge year. Now, moving into phases 2 and 3, Corinne mentioned that phase 1 and the bridge phase is really deemed time critical. Phases 2 and 3 are characterized as non-time critical. And these phases would be executed assuming that Midas Gold is successful in moving forward with the project and into construction and operations. And the work in this phase is really focused on larger scale work that really needs to take advantage of the size of equipment that would be required to move much larger tonnages of historical mining waste. And it would involve much larger removal actions, something that with a mining operation would be well suited and well positioned to do that, both economically and physically. And so those actions are much lesser defined in this AOC. They would require an additional agreements, but what it really involves is dealing with the bigger red polygons that you saw in the early slide that Corinne presented. And that involves dealing with, for instance, the Northwest Bradley dump. That's really the single largest tonnage that I mentioned. And then there's a number of other areas, including the old Bradley oxide stockpiles that again, they're really, in order to move the kinds of tons that in order to address those components, it really does take a mining solution and larger equipment and, you know, with a mining operation attached to it to attack those issues. I think that's it. So we would love to try to answer any questions you may have.
Excellent. Thank you so much, John. We do have a few questions, and I'm just going to stick with you if you are okay with that. The first question is, are there fish in Hennessy Creek that will be affected by the proposed diversion?
No, there are not.
Okay.
I think that's as simple as I get. Yeah, similarly with DMEA, but that's not the case, obviously, with the East Fork and Meadow Creek.
Okay. It's
the case with Hennessy, with DMEA, and with the diversion also at the mill and smelter area.
Assuming that the old dumps will dewater, do we have an estimate on how long that would take?
We don't have an estimate. You know, we've developed a fair amount of pretty comprehensive tools to estimate groundwater flows and levels in the area, but as I'm sure you can imagine, it's a very dynamic and complex area when we're dealing with flows in dumps directly adjacent to the rivers. We certainly expect that the groundwater levels will drop as a result of implementing a given diversion. But will it completely eliminate groundwater within the dumps? I don't think we can know that. And at this time, we do have monitoring information that will be able to evaluate that, but we don't know exactly how the groundwater will vary spatially throughout the year as a result of these diversions.
Kind of sticking with this, will there be liners placed over the material waste once they are moved to their new locations?
We're not going to be placing a liner over top of the dump on a dump situation, as in the Northwest Bradley dump. They will all be graded to positively grade. There won't be low permeability liners placed at this time. The on-off pads will include a soil cover over top of that, and we have specific criteria we have to meet on the gradation of those materials and the revegetation of it, and the overall surface gradient.
Excellent. I'm just going to stick with you, John, until someone else wants to chime in. Do you need to do cultural resource surveys in already mined areas?
Yes, we ultimately we will have to do cultural resource surveys in every area we're proposing to touch as part of these removal actions, and that includes historical. That will include historical mining areas.
Okay, and I'm not sure who these next two need to go to, whether it be you or Corinne. But the first one is, have ARARs been agreed on with EPA? Can you first explain what an ARAR is, and then let us know if it's been agreed upon?
Do you want to cover that, Corinne, or do you want me to? Oh, you're muted. We may have others that may be better also on this.
Yeah, I was going to say, John, I think you've been more in the weeds on this piece than I have.
Yeah, I don't know if if Gene's still on, he may be best to address. Yeah, do you want to answer that one, Gene?
Yeah, so AARs are what is it? Appropriate, relevant, and applicable regulations, or something along those lines. And those are, what other rules would apply or should apply if this were done outside CERCLA. And there are a few obvious ones for us that we think are probably coming, but establishing those as part of our work plan we have started on the work plans now, but we've got to establish what those might be as part of the work plan process.
All right, great. And would phase 2 and 3 be conducted under CERCLA or NEPA?
They would continue to be conducted under CERCLA.
Okay. Excellent.
Yeah, we were pretty careful when working with EPA and Forest Service. They really made clear that they wanted to keep these two regulatory processes separate. So these phases are designed to work through CERCLA.
Thank you, Corinne. Someone would like to know when we're anticipating starting phase 1 work.
Well, right now we've kicked off the project with the EPA and Forest Service team. We're actively working on developing work plans. We've engaged our consulting team to we've got a bunch of design work to do, and a pretty rigorous approval process to move through with EPA and the Forest Service. We hope to begin work as early as this summer, but really that is somewhat determined by how fast we can get through the design process. And, ultimately, we have to be mindful that doing construction work at Stibnite is a very seasonal activity. All these actions are working close to water. And so we have to be very mindful of when we start work that we have to be able to finish it and leave it in a good place so that when the snow melt comes at us the following spring, that we haven't created any problems as a result of the work we started the year before. So we have to be mindful that we're not starting too late in the construction season.
And can you confirm how long we planned for phase one to be completed? And then also what assurances we've secured from the agencies that they will provide approvals to proceed with the work in the projected timeframes?
Well, we have a schedule as part of the ASAOC statement of work. We're doing everything, and I think this is true of the agency folks as well, as we're working collectively to try to move everything forward as quickly as possible. But we're not going to go at it at a speed. I think both entities would agree on this, that we do it carelessly. We have time to do all of these actions. I don't believe there's any problem with completing this in the 4-year time frame that defines phase one. We'd all like to do it sooner, but we're going to do it at the speed that Mother Nature and the regulatory process allows us to move it forward in.
Excellent. Thank you, John. One last question from an individual who has had quite a few, and I'm loving these. How many surface water monitoring wells does the Stibnite project have around the project site?
Oh boy, Gene, I don't know if you know the answer to that.
Yeah, I just shot an email to a couple of folks that I know might have the answer at their fingertips, but yeah, there are dozens of wells for groundwater and dozens of seeps and adit seeps that are monitored, and there are, in addition to that, we've got I think it's 5 USGS gauges that were established that we fund, or at least fund in part, all around the site. So, and all those have been monitored since about 2012, or water year 2012 in some cases. So they started in late 2011 and continue to date. But yeah, it's dozens. I don't know the precise numbers. That's all out there in our baseline reports that are public under NEPA.
I think Blaine just answered that we sample. Blaine's on in our field operations team and responsible for a lot of the sampling, and he said we monitor 33 locations.
Hi guys.
I let Blaine talk so that he could answer more if somebody has some more questions surrounding that. Kind of along the same lines, how much baseline data has been collected from the adit discharges already for the NEPA evaluation?
Well, generally speaking, we sample quarterly now, and we did sample at higher frequencies in some areas before we went to quarterly. But generally speaking, most of the adits, that at least the 5 that we're going to be characterizing as part of phase one, have been monitored since about 2012, some earlier.
All right. Does anybody else have any other questions that they'd like to pop into the Q&A box? Ooh, one more. Do we have mind maps for the adits?
Do we have mine mats?
Maps, M-A-P-S.
Oh, we have all of the underground workings at Stibnite modeled in 3 dimensions. We have gone to great lengths to scan and georectify every single one of the historical underground working maps from Bradley era, and we, quite frankly, we're pretty confident in that information because we've done also a lot of drilling in the area as part of our exploration project, and we can predict when we're going to hit underground workings associated with our own drilling. So we're pretty confident we have a good handle on much of the underground, certainly the production level workings. Are there other adits out there that may have been dug pre-Bradley? Certainly, but I think that the major ones that are connected to a lot of the underground workings are very well understood.
Great, thank you, John. And then a broader question from one of the attendees: are the dumps actual tailings piles? And can we reprocess the dumps for minerals and materials?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the lion's share of the dumps that I talked to today, when I'm referring to dumps, I'm generally talking about underground muck but predominantly open pit rock that was rock that was excavated associated with going after the ore. And it's still, in all likelihood, it's got, it's adjacent to the ore, still has elevated levels of arsenic and antimony in it. But generally, most everything that I referred to in terms of waste and dumps, that's really run of mine rock. It's not gone through leaching, it's not gone through grinding or processing. That rock, we generally, it's impossible for us to really characterize it enough, at this time to know whether we're going to mill and reprocess that material. There's just no geologic continuity to a dump. And a lot of this is also overburdened, whether it be alluvial or glacial materials that are generally not likely to have elevated levels of gold, antimony, silver in them. And that is completely intermixed in many cases with that mineralized rock that was mined as part of Bradley era. That does, but do we expect that as we run into the material that we will be reprocessing some of it? Absolutely. We generally will be characterizing all the materials we move. Certainly in operations, when we get into phases 2 and 3, we would fully expect that we would reprocess a lot of that material, and we'll have the capability to do it. Obviously, as part of this removal action, we don't have a mill to do any reprocessing. We will simply be stockpiling at this time, but we will be characterizing it, and if that characterization supports us reprocessing, we will most certainly. We are planning to reprocess the tailings. Now the tailings, more than 90% of the tailings at the site that were mined historically and milled by Bradley are below what's referred to as the soda area in Meadow Creek, or the spent ore disposal area. And that spent ore was leached in the 80s and 90s and placed on top of Bradley's old tailings. We have done an appreciable drilling in through the soda and the Bradley tails, and all of that characterization work has allowed us to find whether that material, we can reprocess it and recover gold and antimony and silver. And the answer to that is yes, we can and will. And then any material that really is at the interfaces, really the bottom interface is the key, that has appreciable organic materials in it. Obviously, trees, etc. That material, if it's too contaminated with organics, we would basically take that material and just place it in our tailings storage facility, because process plants don't generally like trees. So.
Thank you, John. And then I do have a pretty good clarifying question here from somebody. He is wondering about acid water from sulfides. Is that an issue at site? And if it is, will it be remedied along with arsenic and antimony remediation?
Yeah, that's a good question. We are very fortunate at Stibnite that there is almost no evidence of acid rock drainage occurring in the dumps or in the historical tailings. We have a fair amount of buffering capacity in the rock. Our issue, and this material has been exposed for 80 to 90 years in many cases. So, we feel pretty good about the fact that in all likelihood, the dumps that exist there now have much higher sulfide values than we would have in our future operations, primarily because Bradley was mining much higher grade material when they were mining. They were picking the center out of the ore body and mining higher grades. We're mining kind of the halo around those areas, and so our material, as the sulfide grades drop out, outside of the center of those, it's an epithermal deposit. The arsenic and antimony sulfide concentrations are also dropping, and so we don't see any evidence in the existing dumps or pit, and we don't believe that this is a major issue for us moving forward. But we have to be very cognizant that metal leaching will be the issue going forward, and we're cognizant of that.
Great, thank you. And with the 1 o'clock hour creeping up on us, I have one last question. I think it's a great one to end on, because not only did it get asked here, but we've been asked on social media and through emails to several of our employees on just the permitting schedule and timeline in general. The last 12 months for Midas Gold has been pretty exciting. There's been a lot happening. We've had our 75-day comment period that closed. We submitted our feasibility study, and we just signed this ASAOC. So a lot of people are wondering what's going on the permitting side of things. Could you just give an overview on what that schedule looks like?
I will give a high level. Obviously, we've getting the draft EIS out in last year was a key milestone for us. Getting through the comment period as well, also a key milestone. Published our feasibility study shortly after that. Again, another key milestone for us. So what's coming up is, ultimately we're hoping that this year we're going to see the final EIS come out before year end, and a record of decision that we hope is transformative for us this year. So we're looking forward to those later on, in all likelihood towards the end of this year. And so we are working with the Forest Service and the other agencies to move through that NEPA process as quickly and as efficiently as we can. But we're hoping that those approvals are in place by year end.
Excellent. And I am going to take back what I said and end on this note. With the change in administration, have we seen, or do we anticipate any delays in the process?
That's a good question. So we embarked upon permitting of the Stibnite Gold Project with not the previous administration, but the one before that. And we have not changed strategies. We have not changed anything about the way we're permitting the project through that administration change, nor do we are planning any changes associated with this administration. I don't think that that would be particularly strategically good move for us. We are trying to make this politically agnostic, I would say, and that's the methodology we're using, and we're continuing to work towards moving the project forward on that basis.
And the only thing I'd add to that is, while, you know, things can seem disruptive, especially on the news when you have changes in leadership at the top or in DC, we're going to continue to be working with the same great career staff that we've been working with throughout this whole process. It's the same people, and you know, they've been involved in this all along. And so I don't think we have any reason to think that a change in administration is going to cause further delays.